Heath here, welcome back to the channel, and today I'm going to do a video on one of my custom LH LX Torana SLR type SpeedHut custom dash instrument clusters. So these are a thing that uses SpeedHut gauges from America. I've modified the graphical design to look more like a Torana, and I've made this adapter kit. So I did it for my own car to begin with, which was maybe 3-4 years ago, I guess, when I had my car in the build. I did my first one, and it involved quite a lot of measuring and 3D CAD and prototyping and figuring out, you know, the best way to make these things look good and adapt into the dash. Took quite a lot of work, and once I did the first one for my own car, I had a lot of other people wanting them for their own cars, so I decided to start making some of the adapter pieces that I designed, and I was just selling them to people so that they could duplicate my setup. Every now and then I actually build a complete cluster, but I've had a couple of sets of gauges in stock and stuff like that with my graphical design. I've built a few over the years, but I've probably sold, you know, I don't know, 80 conversion kits or something like that. So anyway, it's going to be better to explain how to put these things together in a video than it is just on the phone each time and stuff. So I thought people might find it interesting, and I'm just going to demonstrate how it goes together. But to begin with, I'll talk about what the gauges are. So they're a US built thing. They're made by SpeedHut. I use 4-inch round ones, and they're they're a pretty advanced gauge compared to what a Torana came with. So the Torana just had a front lit, pretty simple thing. This is a base model one out of an S model Torana, so it doesn't even have a clock. The SL has a clock there, but the base model just has this weird radar looking thing. I don't know what that was supposed to do. So that's totally non-functional in a base model Torana. This is a 160 km/h speedo, and that's a mechanical speedo, so it has a speedo cable that drives it. On the right, it's got the only other information. In this case, it's got a fuel gauge, and it has some idiot lights, some warning lights for no alternator or low oil pressure and stuff. Pretty coarse information if you've got a worked motor in your Torana nowadays. You've got a modern motor, or a motor that you've spent a lot of money building, like a hotted up Holden 6 or 308 or whatever. You probably don't want to just be running on a dumb warning light. Now, you can have other gauges in your car on the bonnet or whatever if that's your poison, but these are more focused for, I guess, an OEM plus kind of look. So they're actually quite subtle. Most people looking at my car, they actually don't realise that it has aftermarket gauges until they really look close or I tell them. So the differences here. So these are designed graphically to look very much like an SLR type cluster. This is a yellow on black design, so that would be an LX SS or SLR sports cluster. And that's an 8,000 RPM tacho, which is higher than a standard Torana ever came with. So it's got a 6,500 RPM red line marked on there, and the fonts and the ticks and all that kind of stuff. I drew all that in Photoshop and got it all, drew all those logos and stuff and got them all looking nice and original style. So it doesn't look exactly like a factory one, but it's a pretty close representation of what the standard LHLX came with. So it's just a digital tacho that just takes a single tacho signal. It can run with individual coil packs or a simple dizzy or any kind of signal that any number of motors can give you. You can just program it to take the signals or to interpret the signal according to 6 pulses per rev or whatever it might be. Like it's got all that programmed. It's got a little external button that you can program it with. The speedo, which sits in the middle, so that's a 160k speedo. This is a 200 km/h speedo, which is the same as a SLR. Now, you could buy these gauges with a 240 or 260 max, I think, but I prefer the 200 because when you're at highway speeds at 100 km/h, it sits perfectly vertical, so it's very comfortable to read. And also, if you want to know how fast you go, like I've had mine up to 235 or something on the racetrack, I can just go into the menu and I can just see the maximum recall. So it's not like I don't need to see it live. I'm not going to be looking at that when I'm going mega fast anyways. I'm going to be looking at the road. So that works really well. It's a GPS one and it's very accurate, very responsive. You do drop out momentarily when you go through a... sometimes when you go over an overpass, but typically when you go into a tunnel, you run out. But even in like bumfuck nowhere, you never run out of GPS signal. So if you're in the country, you're never going to have any problems like that. And this has a quarter mile timer because it's a GPS thing as well as a... well, yeah, because it's a GPS thing, you can actually do a start-stop for a quarter mile. You can do a 0 to 100 kilometre an hour indicated timer. You got a trip meter. It's a pretty flash thing. They work really nicely. This is the quad gauge. So instead of just having a fuel gauge like a base model, now you have a settable fuel gauge that can accept, you know, custom ranges or certainly any like OEM type sender information. So that's sweet. It's got a settable warning light, so you can have that come on red at 1/8 of a tank or something if you want. It's got a temperature gauge. It comes with its own 2-wire sender for this. And once again, you can set the warning light. So on my case, or in my car, I have the light come on when the motor's cold. So if my dickhead mates are trying to tell me to do a burnout and I know that the oil pressure is going to spike and going to be a problem, I'm not going to do it until that light goes out. I know that the car has to run for a few minutes before that light goes out, and then I can start beating on it a bit. When it gets hot, of course, I don't want to be having to look at the gauge. It'll come up red and it'll be, okay, obviously it's running warm. That's what you would expect with any of these things. It's settable on the oil pressure in the same way. I've got low and high, so I don't, you know, chew out the gear if I rev it up too hard when it's cold. And of course, if I'm on the track and it runs low, I want to know, I don't want to be having to look at that. I want to be able to see the light come on out of the corner of my eye. Same deal with the voltmeter. So it's got a voltmeter and I've got that set up so if it's under or overcharging, it lets me know. These gauges are backlit, not front lit. So in the case of the factory gauges, they have that kind of grey slot that you might be able to see at the bottom. They've kind of got that slot all around each of the 3 sections. They have small globes around there, and that has a subtle glow at night when the headlights are on, when the illumination circuit is enabled, and it lights up the front of these panels. So these are just sheet metal, these things are just black sheet metal panels essentially with, I think, pad printed logos on them. So to see the logos, you need to see the panel. So it lights up the front of the panel and you're kind of looking at a light when you're driving along the road. You're looking at something that's illuminated. Not the most comfortable for your eyes, particularly if you're on a country road. So the way that these work, and it's just the way that every modern car works, it's nothing revolutionary, but it's revolutionary to put it in a Torana, is that the face of the gauge, the black, stays fully black at the middle of the night or whatever. You pull the illumination circuit on, the headlights on, and the only thing that illuminates is the pointer of the needle and the logos. So they are actually like a transparent kind of thing, whereas the black is opaque, and the light comes in from behind and illuminates all those logos. So all you see is very small areas of illumination. You get very good contrast without having a bright thing that you're staring at. Works bloody awesome, would recommend. So here are some assembled dashes, and these are just 3 kind of garden variety ones that are, you know, right for the conversion, I guess. So I'm going to convert one of those in the video to show people how it goes down. This is an LX type 1, so it's once again yellow on black, same as the gauges there, and it's got the button extenders. So this is to do your trip meter and to set up your quad gauge with all your limits and ranges and all that kind of stuff. I actually assemble them with the plastic lenses on the front in the end. It's probably not going to look as good in the video because we've got the light, the kind of unnatural light from directly above, but that has a really nice OEM plus look in the car, and the reflection's not bad when it's actually in the dash, when it's recessed into the dash. So I like that look. The little button extenders come out, so it's very comfortable. You can use that easily when you're driving the car. You don't have to, contort your hand down into the pockets. The whole thing about the way that these are adapted in is I want them to look very, I wanted the dash to look very factory style, very well finished. And the problem, of course, here is that you're putting a round gauge into a pocket in the dash that's not actually round. So if you just put it directly into behind that, you get the bezel kind of showing around the corners and this dead space in the corners. It's just finished really poorly. I've seen people just put the gauges in the dash with like a sheet metal thing to hold them there, but it doesn't look integrated at all. It doesn't look anywhere near as nice as the factory ones were. Like the factory ones are not actually round. The font on them is round, but the panels are they correspond to the shape of the pocket, so it actually looks perfectly good. But yeah, round gauges, of course, they look like shit behind a square hole. So anyway, this is one of the 3D printed adapters. So these actually clip onto the black front piece of this original dash assembly, and these are my design, and they just allow for the bezel to be masked really nicely, so they sit on there really nicely, and it just looks properly finished. They have a very nice satin finish. They're a 3D printed SLS type process. They're pretty expensive, but they don't require any finishing. My earlier versions of them were FDM printed, and they required quite a lot of hand sanding and stuff before they looked any good. So that's the latest version. This aluminium laser cut thing, that's the other thing that I designed. So that is used to mount the gauges. The gauges are a flush mount or panel mount type gauge. I think that's the way that they kind of call this mounting style, where it's got a big nut on it. So as long as you have a big hole, you can put it in a bit of sheet metal with that. So these have the big holes that are suitable, and what we do is we cut off the back of the white part of this housing. So on this housing, what I'm going to do, I'm going to lose these lenses because they're scratched up. They're not really serviceable anyway. So I'm going to replace those with aftermarket ones. The factory ones are actually good if you can get good originals, but a lot of them have had a hard life. So these ones are stuffed. There's not an easy way to bring them back. So I'll put aftermarket ones like Rare Spares type products on there. I'm going to keep the black front piece, but I'm going to separate that and clean up the back of it. I'm going to give it a wash. It's all covered in barn dust at the moment. The white section that has all the globe holders and stuff, I'm going to cut the back of that off. I'm actually going to cut that at a depth of 33 millimeters from the front. So from that front edge there to where I've marked it with the texture, it's 33 millimeters, and I'm just going to mark that with the texture all around. I'm going to cut it with a with a 1 millimeter thick cutting disc on an angle grinder. There may be other ways to do it, but that seems to work fine for me. So I'll just disassemble it. I'll actually get rid of the original internals and the wiring. I'm going to cut the back off, screw that on, put the gauges into there, and I'll show how one of these gauge packages comes together. So I hope you find it informative, and if you're building one yourself, obviously it's going to be quite helpful. But it may just be an interesting watch for people who've seen these dashes before and been curious about how they go together. Yeah, it's not a 2-minute job, and good luck doing it without parts like this. So I can just I can sell you the conversion kit if it's what you want, and you can design weird green and blue coloured gauges or whatever on the SpeedHut website if you want. Or if you want to do it more OEM style, then I can help you out with that stuff as well, with the drawings and everything. So yeah, let's rip in and cut some material. So as I said, first job is just marking out where we're going to cut this thing. So I'm going to remove some of the barn dust from it so it's just a bit cleaner. These textures are amazing, by the way. These are Milwaukee Inksol. Way better than a Sharpie from my experience. So I'd recommend going and getting a set of those if you're having problems with longevity with markers in the workshop. If you get them greasy or oily, put the lid back on and put them away for a little while, and they'll probably come up and work again. They're pretty good. Just don't use them on sharp edge is where they're going to be abraded away. That would be my advice. Other than that, they last bloody ages. I've had most of mine for years. I just buy more so that I can compensate for where I, leave them in the wrong spots and stuff like that. And if I want more colours, it's nice to have lots of colours. So if you're doing complicated things where you're changing your mind and drawing over the top of old ones, you can differentiate the old from the new dimensions and stuff. Anyway, 33mm from the front edge. Pretty easy. Never worked on video before. To let me know how I'm going. Oh, and like and subscribe. I've never said that before, but apparently I need to say that in my videos because apparently it does make a difference. So I'm just going to get my little 1/4 inch ratcheting socket on there. I guess what I should be doing is putting in the drill. That'd be the most efficient way to do it. I don't really use power tools for that kind of thing, but I suppose you can do that if you prefer. The front face comes off, and these little legs here will need to be removed as well. This is just something you can cut off like that, and you can just snap those legs off. Might seem like a gorilla, but they work fine. They come off cleanly, and these are just glued on with a little bit of hot glue anyway. I've got a hot glue gun over there that I'm going to use for reinstalling some parts, and in the same way, it makes nasty noises, but they actually come off really cleanly. So a little bit of even pressure with a few fingers. I've never actually broken one. They don't even require that much force. So that there is in good condition. The tabs are still there. These get damaged fairly often. If they rip out, they're a bit of a bastard to repair, but they can be repaired. There's a bit of force through them, unfortunately, and they never get damaged in the car. They only get damaged by people who are rough when the stuff is, disassembled from the car. So that's a shame, but that's just how these things go often. There's a little bit of glue on these fasteners here on the electrical connector, so I'm just going to rip that off with the small screwdriver, and then I'm going to see if I can unscrew them without damaging anything. This is a factory GM 11 pin, I think, connector. I don't think it's a very nice connector. I personally think for cars that are getting rewired and stuff, it's just better to put like a Deutsch DT or something like that on there. But anyway, if you want to use it, that's fine. You can just remove these globe holders and take it out, and you can just cut all of the excess wires off essentially. So we'll just cut this back to the bare basics, and then if you want to splice that into whatever your if you want to splice that into the new SpeedHut loom, no worries. There's plenty of length on there that you'll be able to do that, and I'll include a document that shows the kind of wiring configuration, so that you know what colours of the factory loom match up with what colours on the SpeedHut wires. It's a pretty simple process to do. So I'll snip all that off. So that connector, once again, just needs a clean, and it can be reused if you want. All this other stuff can just go. I'm not even going to keep it at this stage, I've got so many of them. Once again, I have lots of these already, so if anybody needs any spare gauge parts from a factory Torana, contact me and I'll sort you out. And otherwise, I'm just going to cut it down. I used to unbolt the gauges, but there's just not that much point nowadays, I find. So this is what you get when you cut that out. I don't need these little lens holders, so I'm going to cut those out as well. So that's essentially what you're after. Now this looks a little bit messy, so I'm going to run over it with a file and get it looking spick and span. So the dirtiest of the work has been completed now. I've given these parts a bit of a scrub and they are looking quite all right now. So I'm just going to get a drill bit and clean up. So I'm going to go for a 3.5mm drill, and I'm going to drill into these holes at the back of the plastic to just make sure they have a little bit more clearance than they had originally. Normally this part of the hole is not being used, it's only the front half that gets used, so I'll just open them up just a little bit for the 8 gauge self tappers that I put in there. I don't drill very deep, you know, 10mm is plenty. And that's all good. That's pretty much ready to go. So that's essentially what that looks like. All the details have been removed, and it's just the outside frame, which is all good to go. This is the back of this section here. So it did have those little feet that stood up, and actually had some there, but they were already removed. So anyway, I was able to just snap those off, and that's fine. That's enough for what the adapter kit needs to fit on with. I'm going to get the backing plate here. I'm actually going to countersink the holes so that I can put some countersunk screws in there. The way that it is oriented, obviously that is the way that that sits. The big chamfers line up with the big chamfers there, and when you get this piece here, it all lines up together like that. So that's the way that it sits in the car. These little irregular looking holes are just so that you can have a cable tie to secure the wiring if you want. You may not choose to use that, but anyway, you can put a cable tie in and stick it out the other one, and you can secure your wiring harness there if you need to. But anyway, I'm just going to run the countersinking bit into these. Nothing awfully scientific there. So if we put it the way that it faces towards you, we put the gauges in the correct orientation, which is tacho on the left, speedo in the middle, and quad gauge on the right hand side. You could put them in a different way, but that's the way that is the most representative of the factory style. The way that I've done all my dashes so far. And one thing you can do, which I haven't done here, is if you're really a bit of a perfectionist, like in my own car, I actually put a little bit of electrical tape, actually a little bit of satin black vinyl wrap over the SpeedHut Inc. logos. They will not provide these gauges without their little bit of branding on there, but if you do want to, you can get a little bit of satin black vinyl wrap, or maybe even electrical tape, cut it into a little slither and stick it over there. I don't think most people care, and it's a little bit fiddly to do, but yeah, you can unscrew this bezel, remove the glass lens, and just with tweezers you can cover those little logos if you feel compelled to do so. So that's basically how that looks. This section here goes over there. This section here goes on there, but we're missing the actual conversion kit now. So I'll screw the two rear bits together, and then I'll mock up the 3D printed conversion parts, and then it'll start to look like a complete thing. So the backing plate's been screwed on and the gauges have been kind of nipped up in a position, which I'm going to double check and tighten a bit further. I've got the 3 adapter pieces here. The one that is open, it doesn't have any detail, that belongs on the left for the tacho. The tacho doesn't have any buttons on it, so that one's the simplest. Now, these two look the same, but they are slightly different with where this sits. So you can just do a quick mock-up and see. I mean, I'm pretty sure I can tell that that's the speedo one and that's the quad gauge one, but you'll very easily determine that when you go to put it together and see how they line up. Don't glue anything until it looks good, of course. These are a pretty nice size, so that actually just kind of clips on pretty nicely. They vary a little bit sometimes, but generally they kind of snap on with enough friction that they can stay there for the mock-up. I think this one was maybe a little bit looser, but not so much that it's a problem. It'll still kind of stay there for the most part. So we'll just be gentle with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide that in and just see how things line up. I can do a little bit of clocking with these, and I do need to do a little bit of clocking each time so that I get them just in the right spot, so the push rods really line up well. So I guess the first step is to get the gauges sitting just how you want them. There we go. Not quite stiff enough on that. So you can just tighten these up by hand and just make sure that they're clocked in a way that all the stuff, you know, points nice and vertical. That one's a little bit out. You are going to be looking at it, so you will notice. You will notice if you get it wrong. I'd recommend spending a little bit of time to get it nice and sweet. So I'm quite happy with that. So I'm just going to start off by seeing if the glue gun is ready, and if it is, put a little bit of product on. It's like the most basic version of welding in the world. Welding for preschoolers. So I normally put a bit of glue on 4 corners. I've never had that be a problem. With the tacho one, there's really no clocking required. Now, the tabs are a little bit below centre if you look at this, so you'll see that these tabs are not symmetrical, so they're not a universal thing that can be flipped around. They have to be on the lower part. So if they're on the lower part, they will dodge around that gusset and they'll all line up like so. So that's how you do it. And on the tacho one, just make sure there's no edges showing, and that's satisfactory. That's good enough. A bit of glue there. and that's done. The problem with hot glue guns is that they leave stringy stuff everywhere, so you do just have to spend a minute ripping all of that off when it's cooled down a little bit. But it cleans up pretty well, and if you stuff something up with the hot glue gun, it's not irreparable. You know, you can scrape the stuff off and have another go. I don't know if there's a way to avoid this stringing. I doubt there is, but if there is, then let me know in the comments, of course. It's really not a big problem. The dash is pretty much complete now. I've put a bit of glue on those and they are fastened into position. When I slip that onto the white part of the housing, the buttons line up nicely, so they all function beautifully. You can feel them clicking nicely through there. There's not a lot of pressure required. And we're missing the lenses. So I've got a lens here. It's not quite good enough. The customer who's buying this is supplying his own lenses that are nice originals. So that's what I prefer to use anyway. I don't have any here. So anyway, these just clip into position, and that's fine for the tacho because the tacho doesn't have any button on it. But these ones here have the big push rods hanging out, and the way to do that is that you just remove that, slide the push rod back, sit that on where it belongs. It actually sits quite positively where it should be. You drive the push rod forward against the lens and you can just get a texter and mark where that touches it. And I find the best way to do it is to now take that off, drill it with a slightly undersized, slightly blunt drill bit if possible. I find that really sharp ones can promote some cracking near the hole, so a slightly blunt one seems to work a little bit better. And I drill that through and I use a little needle file just to file that hole so that it sits on a bit of an angle, and that suits the way that lens sits because it is somewhat of a curved piece. So you file them out and you can get them to fit really nicely. You don't see any gap around it. Looks Mickey. And then we've got the wiring parts that go with it. So this is the 3-wire oil pressure. That's a 0 to 5 volt approximately with its own sub harness. I normally leave that intact, although you can of course cut it down in length when you put it through the connector if you want. You've got like a firewall connector or whatever. That's a 2-wire water temperature, sorry. This one can only be used for the gauge. If you have an ECU that wants 0 to 5 volt for your oil pressure, you can use this for both your ECU and your gauge, but this you should only use for the gauge. If you want to have something else for a ECU or any other measurements, you want to have a separate sender, keep it totally separate from this. And these grounds, the black wires in here, the gauge grounds, keep them specifically isolated to these senders. That is my recommendation. The fuel level, who gives a shit? It's got 2 wires, a white and a black. I would just run the black to your normal gauge ground. It's not that critical. The white you connect to the tan colour in your factory loom to go to the fuel tank. You only need 1 wire to go there. You just do not need to run that black one back. So it comes with shitloads of wire there. You don't need it from my experience. And this is the Speedo's GPS antenna. That just plugs onto the back, and you've got an external button for the tacho as well that plugs onto the back. So they've got these little connectors across here. That one just goes in there. You've got a few connectors for wiring, power, and the different senders for those sub harnesses that go on. And you don't need to have this one permanently installed. You could just plug it on, set it up, and then unplug it and put it on the shelf. But otherwise, you can of course drill a little hole in your dash fascia and just leave it installed. It's not going to hurt. That's just going to be how you choose your pulsing signals essentially. But that is basically a complete dash. I think I've gone through what needs to be done. When you do want to put the lenses on, a little blob of glue in 2 or 3 spots around each will keep it secured, and that's complete, I think. So I hope the video was informative. I hope that's of interest, and let me know the other kind of stuff that you want me to cover in future content, because I'm looking to do some more videos if people are enjoying it. Cheers, all the best.